Kevin Hollinrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a real pleasure to speak after the Right Honourable Lady for Barking. We work together on so much, and this legislation tonight is something we've been working on for such a long time. So, real pleasure. And I will talk about New Clause 2 when I come to my bits on whistleblowers. But really, number one thing I want to talk about is Amendment 64. I mean, I think what many people in this debate have spoken about is the danger of asset flight. And in reality, we know this is happening already. They're not going to wait for this legislation to come into effect to try and hide their money. So whether it is 18 months or 6 months or 28 days for a transition period doesn't really matter, because these kind of individuals can move this money around so quickly. So, as I say, much of this will have happened already. So I did support Amendment 16 in the name of the opposition, but I'd like to think the manuscript amendment, I'm very grateful to the Speaker and the Deputy Speakers for allowing this to be selected, for selecting this amendment, might be more effective than that. I think there are some other amendments that have been put down as well, New Clause 28 and 29, very important amendments about freezing orders. I think the difficulty with those amendments, as I said in my earlier intervention, is you can't freeze something you don't know exists. It's very difficult to do that. What you need to do is look behind the curtain, look at the who owns the assets, and that's obviously what this legislation does. It's primarily about transparency. It's being able to see who owns what. And I'm very grateful to the support of many people on this manuscript amendment 64, including my honourable friend, I think he's honourable, should be right honourable, but the member for Weston-super-Mare, the government's anti-corruption champion. We worked very closely on this, and straight away when we looked at this legislation, we thought there is something missing here. Clearly, these people are going to move this money around very quickly to make sure it's not touched. I think this probably does something. I'm not a lawyer. I looked at this over the weekend and didn't have any legal input, so I can't say it's totally fit for purpose. So I'm really interested in what the Minister has to say about it. And he's been engaged in this all the way through, and we're willing to discuss with me, as we did yesterday, talking about this, what we do to close this potential loophole. I think it simply does. It requires the beneficial ownership to be registered with Companies House, and that links into the Land Registry's requirement to make sure something is properly registered with Companies House before it allows a transfer or a sale to happen. So really, and without Land Registry doing that, of course, you can't sell or transfer a piece of land or property. So I think very happy to do that. Yeah.
Making a very good speech about the importance of that relation with Land Registry and Companies House. Would you agree with me that, to the government particularly, a point, that the requirement still to pay to access the Land Registry dims that light when it is shone rather than enhances it, and actually making it an open registry with Companies House as an open registry would actually aid this process of light shining as well?
Well, it will do. This is a public register, of course. The beneficial owner will be revealed, and that person then can be, if that person's on the sanctioned list, for example, that asset can be frozen. That's the way this will actually work. And if you're in the legislation, I think page 49, Schedule 3, clauses 2 and 3, 1, 2 and 3 require the Land Registry to do that, and it can prohibit or restrict a transfer or a sale. That's the key to this. So the only where it's not currently fit for purpose, in my view, this doesn't take effect for 18 months. If you took those clauses out or changed the timescales, made it immediate, this comes into immediate effect upon the commencement date of the legislation. It means from day one, I think, potentially it would prevent that sale or transfer of assets from one person to another or one entity to another, and then therefore move those assets around to prevent what we're all concerned about, which is asset flight. I would appreciate, I know the Minister's responded to this a couple of times from the dispatch box. I think there's a good chance this legislation, this particular amendment would pass if pushed to a vote. So I'd appreciate confirmation from the Minister, if he's listening, the Minister right now, I'd appreciate confirmation from the Minister for the dispatch box, whether he would, I know he's indicated he would, bring forward something similar in the Lords that has a similar effect. So we have a day one restriction or prohibition on the sale or transfer of assets from one to another, if he's willing to do that.
No, listen, we're not having this. We're getting on with this. Otherwise, people who have got something to say won't get a chance to do it. Mr. Hollenrake, come on.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just trying to establish the fact that this would be done in the Lords if it wasn't done here tonight, Mr. Speaker. And perhaps in his summing up, he will say that later. He's nodding. He's nodding. Yeah, thanks very much. Hansard has got the face nodding. So that's very, very important. Okay, the other very important thing I want to discuss here, mention here in my remarks, that often gets missed in this, and we've talked, that's on the record, that's great. Many people members across the House have talked about resources, absolutely right. New Clause 2, New Clause 9 deal with resourcing, absolutely right. And there is nowhere near enough resources applied to economic crime. It's 40% of all crime or 1% of the resources. The Office of Financial Services, Financial Sanctions Implementation, for example, one of our bodies required, charged with the responsibility for enforcement, I think last year sanctioned two individuals actually, or two companies, collective fines of £85,000. In the US, the similar body did 87 fines for £1.5 billion because they are properly resourced. It's hugely important. New Clause 14, New Clause 27 seek to do this in a different way, however, because what it does, it provides protection for whistleblowers. There is pointless having lots of law enforcement people charging around, not knowing where to look. Whistleblowers tell you where to look. 43% of all financial crimes are identified through whistleblowers. Yet it's something we don't talk about. It's not just more regulators we need. We need somebody who's going to point us in the right direction. Regulators will always be watchdogs, never bloodhounds. You need the bloodhounds in the organisations willing to speak up if things are going wrong. Every single economic crime I've dealt with in the work on the banking side of things and in stuff like the Economic Crime Bill has come as a result of information provided by whistleblowers. GPT Special Projects, my own constituent Ian Foxley, for example, Airbus, $3 billion in fines internationally, £900 million into UK Treasury. All that money came as a result of a disclosure from whistleblowers. Every single case you want to think about, HBOS, PPI scandal, all these whistleblowers. Yet the protections and compensation we offer whistleblowers in the UK is pretty much non-existent. I mean, in the case of Lloyd's HBOS, the FCA themselves were guilty of not protecting the whistleblower. Barclays tried to identify the whistleblower in a case within Barclays, yet very little or nothing is done. So you've got to think, as a whistleblower, I'm thinking of blowing the whistle. Ian Foxley, my constituent, GPT Special Projects, which resulted in £28 million of financial sanctions in a Southwark court last year. He has been 11 years without a single penny. That man was earning £200,000 a year. 11 years without a single penny. Do you think he would step forward next time, or somebody else would do the same? We've got to make sure we protect whistleblowers. Happy to give way.
A very important point in relation to whistleblowers in a domestic context. In the context that we're talking about, and by the way, I support him enormously in what he's been saying about the banking frauds in this country. But in the context in which we're debating this evening, we're talking about sanctions against people who potentially undermine the law of this country by taking action into their own hands against whistleblowers in this country, as we saw in Salisbury, trying to take them out. This is an entirely appropriate matter to defend the personal safety of people who undertake whistleblowing for these people.
I'm very grateful for his support. So New Clause 14 and 27, I will conclude, Mr. Speaker. I won't push to a vote tonight, but I really think it's very, very important in the Economic Crime Bill Part 2 that this is included, modernised legislation, Office for the Whistleblower, provide the protection, and a compensation regime so these people are fairly compensated for bringing forward the information that leads to the prosecution of these crimes, which will lead to the resources for the National Crime Agency, Serious Fraud Office and others. That one thing will lead to another. The Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, which is hugely successful in bringing forward fines on financial organisations, was a relatively small organisation before their whistleblower legislation came into effect. So that's one for later, but the one for now in this legislation has to be Amendment 64 or something similar. I'd really appreciate his confirmation that is something we will do in the Lords as the legislation progresses.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Chair.